Okay. Before we get started, I'm just want to share to a few networks so that they can have the opportunity to see this live. Just give me a moment. And while I'm doing that, you can also get started. Share to your page or invite others to tune in. Okay. 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 All right. So first of all, A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is his messenger. I greet you all the greeting words of peace. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be unto you. Today's topic is entitled Truth Confirmed 2023. Those of you who follow my YouTube channel or my Facebook page, you know that I have been sharing a lot of my research and findings on the Fulbhe people, of whom I trace my roots to and my heritage to. And so it's been a while since I have posted about my research because I felt that I gave so much in terms of information, and I know I gave a lot because people are still discovering the research that I espoused on my YouTube channel and on Facebook. So there are a lot of people who are new to the topic, and they are excited about it. And this is years after I have made these recordings. However, today I want to discuss this book that just came out, entitled African Founders. And what's important to me about this book is that it's written by a Pulitzer Prize winner. So a Pulitzer Prize winner in writing is someone that's held in high regard. This is and he's a white man. He's a scholar by the name of David Hackett Fisher. And you know, it's one thing for somebody like myself who is an independent researcher. I am not connected to any academic research institution. I'm not funded by any research institution. All of my travels that I make to do my research come out of my pocket. You know, I'm a common working man. I save up my money. I hit the the research centers in New York and France and even Morocco, and I pull this information up out of my love for research and my inspiration that I received, as I spoke of on many occasions, when Allah caused me to stumble upon my roots. So in the Holy Quran, it speaks of, in the 16th chapter, 89 verse, how Allah will raise up for every nation a witness. So this type of research that I do and the type of research that is detailed in this book is a witness. And again, we need oftentimes confirmation from those who are considered important in society. I don't need their validation to say that I'm intelligent. However, when you see people of note reflecting the same ideas and discussing the same topics that I have discussed, then you can come to your own conclusion about someone's intelligence. But we should not be looking for any European validation. And I want to say this on the outset, to let you know that this is not why I'm sharing it. We should not be looking for any European validation for our knowledge. A lot of times we take pride in the institutions that we graduate from. I understand. You took out a loan, you paid a lot of money to get that degree, and I respect that. However, from my personal vantage point, why should we even pay these people for knowledge when we descend from the people who gave them the knowledge? Why should we pay them to go to their universities when we descend from the people who invented the university? So just think about that. You know, we need to remove that idea that we need to get knowledge from them. And a lot of our black-owned historical black colleges are founded by non-black people. And in order to get into those historical black colleges, we have to pay and take out loans from non-black people to get a black education. Think about that. So here's somebody, I'm a man without letters, but the research that I have done is confirmed by a Pulitzer Prize winner. That's just what I want to show you. A Pulitzer Prize winner who is of note and has letters. So I'm going to go into some of the details that he goes into in his book, and you could just go back to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Elijah Shabazz, and you'll see that I've basically been saying the same thing. And I am not of their institutions. So that is to put in you, hopefully to inspire you, to have confidence in self-knowledge. You know, have confidence in the inborn intelligence that you have inherited from your ancestors. Yes, that you have inherited from your ancestors. A lot of the great black inventors, we're using this cell phone. I could go on and on. They didn't learn this from any college. They invented the cell phone. They invented the bus port on a computer that causes us to, allows us to use our computers to connect to the internet and to printers. And these are black people that invented this. GPS invented by a black woman. No school taught her that. But of course, NASA is going to take the credit because she worked for them, but they didn't teach her that. This is inborn intelligence given to us that is inherited by us from our ancestors. And we have to come to a point where we need to stop validating them by paying them for knowledge that the Creator has already deposited in us. And the wisdom and the hikmah, as we say, that was given to our ancestors. This is our inheritance. We shouldn't be taking loans from other people and living a lifetime of debt, being enslaved to debt to get something that belongs to us. So, I hope that makes sense to you. So I'm just going to go into the parts because there's a lot he says about how our people are basically the base of this country's wealth and this country even existing. However, my research was specifically on the Fulani people, so I am going to read from these parts of the book that deal with the Fulbhe people. But it's a very interesting book. So one of the chapters is called An Islamic Slave on Maryland's Eastern Shore. Now, when I first started bringing this information out, even some of our people from West Africa didn't believe that they had ancestors that were brought here. But now it's been confirmed over and over. And whoever still has any doubt about the presence of their ancestors here, maybe, what I'm about to read will help to disabuse you of that doubt. So here is an Islamic slave on Maryland's Eastern Shore, and some of you may have heard of him already, Ayuba Suleiman Jallo. So this is just one Fulani. Of course, in this book, it doesn't mention Prince Abdul Rahman, but we know about him. He's one of the most famous. But Ayuba Suleiman Jallo, I'm just going to read real quick. The great wave of slave trading in the 18th century brought other African ethnic and religious groups to the Chesapeake and greatly enriched the cultural diversity of this region. Leading examples were Islamic slaves. They were known by many names in that era. Listen to this closely. Turks, Moors, Mohammedan, Muslims, and more. Now, notice he says Turks, Moors. A lot of you who are of the Moorish Science American Temple, you know of Prince Abdul Rahman, and he's the one who met with the president, and when America had a treaty with Morocco, they, in that treaty they said that no Moroccan can be enslaved. So this particular individual who was identified as a Moor, however, he was not a Moor. He was a Fulani from Futajalan. Prince Abdul Rahman was a Pulo from Guinea. However, he accepted being considered a Moor because who wouldn't want to accept being a Moor if that's going to get you out of slavery. So if if I need to change my identity to a Moor to get out of being enslaved, then I will. And this is what I also discuss about a lot of the Fulani origins of the red bone, because they thought some of us were Indian, some of our ancestors were Indian, and they said, okay, fine, we'll be of Indian mixture. If that's going to get us out of slavery, sure. So Prince Abdul Rahman accepted this Moorish identity in order to get out of slavery. Alan Austin, one of their leading historians in the United States, reconstructed the life stories of 75 Islamic slaves in early America, and he identified many more. Altogether, some scholars conclude that Islamic captives may have totaled as many as 10 to 20% of African slaves in North America. So let's talk about Job real quick. In 1730, Job's father sent him on a trip to the Gambia River. He was captured, sold into slavery for a few cows, and sent to Maryland. He was later extradited to Great Britain, if you know his history, and he wound up even going back to Africa, just like Prince Abdul Rahman. Then you have Yarrow Mahmoud, who, by the way, this painting was in a museum in Philadelphia. So Yarrow Mahmoud, he was born in Fouta Djallon, the high country in Guinea. He was taught to read and write Arabic, raised in Islam, and remained faithful to his teachers through a long life. He was devout in daily prayers and true to the African customs and Islamic ethics. Yarrow and his sister Hannah, so him and his sister was here, were enslaved together, put aboard the ship Elijah. That's very deep, that this is a Fulbhe that was put on the ship named Elijah. Wow. Carried to Annapolis in 1752 and sold apart. Hannah became the slave of Joseph Wilson, who owned 600 acres, 4 farms, and 2 taverns in what was called Prince George's County, and later became Montgomery County. So that was her lot. And then excuse me, let me continue with Yarrow. Several have Fulani and Islamic names, another Yarrow as Isaac, Issachar, and others. They were thought to have arrived together in Elijah, meaning there were several Fulbhe on this ship named Elijah. Much evidence confirms the existence of what James Johnson describes as a small black Muslim community in Maryland at Rockville in the late 18th century, probably centered on Hungerford's Tavern. It also reached into other towns such as Georgetown and Bladensburg, which are now within the District of Washington. So in the early days, or in the 18th century, you had Muslims present inside the Washington, D.C. and Maryland area. And that's just one example. And there's much we could say about Yarrow Mahmoud. But I just want to continue on with the research on Fulbhe people in general. So you have these standout Fulbhe personalities, some of whom their writings are featured in museums, and there's paintings of them featured in museums. But let's go to of Bilali in Georgia phenomenon. There were actually two Bilalis in Georgia that are detailed inside of this book. So another distinctive feature of low country slavery was the exceptional importance of what is called slave managers. Now, I have asserted that these individuals on the Sapelo Islands, the two Bilalis, were not slaves. Because, you know, in action, they could not have been a slave. And when you read the relationship between their so-called master and themselves, you can clearly see these were not slaves. So, however, white historians want to continue to classify them as such, but this is why we need to write our own history to declassify them as such. Because in action and in deed, there's no way these people could have possibly been slaves simply because they were black. These men were to be found in every region, but they were most prevalent in coastal Carolina, where they managed entire plantations. And this goes back to my research on the Fulbhe in the Carolinas, particularly South Carolina, and were treated with respect and deference by masters. I'm going to say that again. Respect and deference. Deference means when you allow them a free reign to do as they please. That's deference. Slaves don't have deference. When you're a slave, you do whatever your master does. So this is a very contradictory statement. Slaves, again, do not have deference. You don't give deference to your slave. Your slave does whatever you want him to do. Think about that. Deference by masters, overseers, and slaves alike. In the dangerous summer months, slave managers were often left to run the entire estate. So this bears witness to what I said in my research, that the European was unable to live on these islands, these coastal islands. Their physical makeup did not permit them to survive in that environment. However, that environment was perfect for cattle rearing and rice growing. So because they needed the crop, they had to allow colored people, and they had to allow Muslims such as Bilali and those who were with him to really live free without no oversight. And this is why they couldn't possibly be slaves. They lived free. Because the European could not stand that environment and be there to micromanage them as they did on the inland plantations. So look at the high intelligence of these Bilalis. In the early years of slavery, these managers were often African-born. An example was Bilali Muhammad, who became the sole manager of 500 slaves. So you're telling me that this one white master was bullying 500 Muslim and enslaving them? The more likely scenario is that the white boy was a front man to pretend like he was their boss as they lived free on the Sapelo Islands. They were using him as a front man because there's no way this one white boy is going to be so feared by 500 African Muslims. No, they would crush him. So this is the wisdom of the Fulani, utilizing this white face as a front to allow them to live freely on the Sapelo Islands. And I'm going to take it even further to show you how there's no way this white man had them enslaved. Think about this. So, on the larger estates, okay. Now, also remembered in slave narratives as Ben Ali, Bu Allah, and Bilal Muhammad, he had been born to a family of great wealth and property in the Fulani culture of West Africa during the mid-18th century. He was raised in or near Timbo, a major center of Afro-Islamic culture in the uplands of what is now Guinea-Conakry, Fouta-Djallon. In Africa, he may have been a slave trader himself and was carried captive to Georgia with all his family. He was described as tall, coal-black, with fine features, and they say arrogant manner and a commanding presence. Bilali was a devout Muslim, literate in Arabic, and fluent also in his native Fulfade, French, and English. In Georgia, he owned a Quran and kept Arabic manuscripts in his own handwriting. A fragment survives a manuscript of a treatise on Islamic law. Now, this is the part I want to talk about. So, in the War of 1812, check this out. During the War of 1812, he kept the slaves. You know, this is their narrative. I want to say he kept the slaves of Allah. They were slaves. They were slaves of Allah. He kept the slaves of Allah together and organized a defense against British raiding parties. Writing to his master, I will answer for every Negro of the true faith, but not for these Christian dogs of yours. Again, in 1824, when a hurricane hit the island, Bilali got the slaves of Allah to safety and even saved the white boy from ruin. So they had so much command over the Sapelo Islands that during the war, this so-called master of theirs broke out, and left Bilali and his followers with guns to defend the island against the enemy. So, I mean, think about that. 500 Muslims with an imam is going to be fearful of one white boy? It's not happening. So again, these were absolutely not slaves. Don't believe the narrative of the white intellectuals. Okay, let us go further. There's much more we could say on that topic, but those two instances should make it very clear to you that these were not enslaved people. They lived freely right here in America during the time of slavery. So this paragraph here, I want to read, and it also speaks to the research that I've done. The Fulani, as we shall call them, have long been respected as highly skilled herders across much of the Sahel below the Sahara. An 18th century traveler observed that the industry of the Fulbhe in pasturage and agriculture is everywhere remarkable. So not only were they cattle rearers, they had an industry in agriculture in general. There's a saying in Fulani, Rimawo Fi Yamago. Rimawo Fi Yamago. Or Rimago, I should say, Rimago Fi Yamago. That's the proper way to say it, Yamago. Which means, you got a farm to eat. So this is an industry that the Fulbhe had mastery over. And this type of skill they brought over to America, which made America a very, very rich country, because America's economy was based on agriculture and cattle rearing. So these two aspects was the bread and butter of the American economy. Let's go further. And if you don't know, they used to not only sell their products here in America, they would ship these products all the way to Europe. So this type of skill made America involved in international trade and commerce. So without this skill brought by these West Africans, this country would not have become as great as it is today. This is the foundation. So let me continue reading. Industry of the Fulani in pasturage and agriculture is everywhere remarkable. In Bondu, they are opulent in high degree. They display great skill in the management of their cattle, making them extremely gentle by kindness and familiarity. Besides the cattle, excellent horses. So a lot of the horse breeding, which is a big industry as well, comes out of the Fulbhe culture, and he gets into that later on in his book. Most were said to live under the influence of what they call Mohammedan laws, which is Islam. But it was often reported that religious persecution is not known among them, meaning that they didn't have an oppressive Al-Qaeda, Taliban-style Islam, where they use Islam to oppress their own people, which is very, very, very interesting to note, the type of Islam that we had before we came here, which speaks to another topic of how they like to depict Islam as a harsh religion, even though, where people use the Sharia to oppress your expression, your natural human expression. Excuse me. We also found the spirit of tolerance among them, and we shall meet them again in Carolina's cow pens and once more on the open range of Texas. Now, this also speaks to another part of my assertions in my research, where I talk about how the Fulbhe are the founders of what is called the cowboy culture in Texas, and there's plenty of evidence, particularly in this work and in other works, to support that assertion, because those type of techniques of dealing with the cows and the horses, and this is interesting that he notes the Fulbhe mastery of horses. There's a video out there where you could see the Fulbhe, the Fulani, doing all those type of tricks that you would see in the rodeos, and then some, and then some. I mean, the way they straddle two horses together. Those people in the rodeo can't do that type of stuff. I mean, these are master horsemen, which in Fulbhe and Pula is called the Puchu. it's like they're masters of the poochoo. And riding, you talking about standing on top of the horse and riding two at a time and doing all type of, flips or whatever. Yes, they've been doing this. And that's what a rodeo is all about. It's about the bull and it's about the horses. All of that culture comes out of the Fulani culture. But the Fulani do it on a much higher level than the rodeo. So this is stolen African culture. Let us continue. So here he goes further on Western frontiers. And it says here, Fulani herders, Carolina cattlemen, Texas Mustangers. So here it is. He's clearly indicating the Fulbhe being at the foundation of this culture that is synonymous with Texas. With their animal understanding, the Fulani actually enter into cattle society and take over. I acted like I was a Mustang. I made the Mustang think I was one of them. Maybe I was. In them days, after I stayed with the bunch long enough, they'd follow me instead of me having to follow them. Show them you're the boss. That's my secret. That's what a Afro-Texas Ranger said. Now that is, as we're going to see, a Fulani technique. There are men. They're talking in African lingo, or black people's lingo, I should say. There are men whom bees will not sting. There are men whom a fierce yard dog will not bark at, much less bite. What is it inside individuals that makes horses untamable by others submit to them gently? Texas historian Frank. So these are observations by white historians on how the Fulbhe had mastery over the horses and the bulls and the cattle. On the western edge of European settlement in North America, African slaves of Allah found another way to change the burden of their bondage. At an early date, free-range livestock industry began to develop in many parts of the New World. The work of actually managing the animal was done by people of different origins. So here, let us go further, and you can see the image of the Fulbhe in their natural environment. And in this particular chapter, it draws the comparison between how the Fulbhe act in their natural environment and how those actions and that behavior and that science, I should say, was imitated and brought to the Americas. Excuse me. Traditions of stock raising in West Africa, Fulani herders. Slaves who came from Africa to North America in the 18th century tended to be highly variable in their experience of working with animals. Their knowledge differed by rank, age, occupation, and by the diversity of African cultures from whence they came. But through much of North and West Africa, the raising of livestock reached high levels of development at an early date, long before the start of the Atlantic slave trade. Regions of special importance were valleys of Gambia, Senegal, and Niger rivers in the north coast of Africa, and broad reaches of the Sahel across much of West Africa below the Sahara. The vast grasslands of the Sahel became the home of many African different stock raising groups. Of special importance to the inquiry are the African people variously called Fulbhe, Pel, Fula, or Fulani. Especially prominent among stock raisers were Fulani groups in Gambia and neighboring areas in West Africa. That African region became important in the slave trade to South Carolina, where free-range stock raising developed rapidly in the 18th century. The importance of Gambia herders to South Carolina cattle raising was first exploited by the American historian Peter Wood. Another scholar, Philip Morgan, also confirmed that connection. Their findings are supported by extensive manuscript records of Henry Lawrence, a leading slave trader in 18th century Charleston. His papers are now accessible in a multi-volume scholarly edition. The Fulani are an ancient African people of distinctive culture and condition. Their origins have been much debated. Some historians believe that they may have been Egyptian in their roots. Others have suggested a kinship with cultures in Ethiopia. Whatever their beginnings, Fulani people spread across large areas of Africa from the Upper Nile Valley in the east to Senegal and Gambia in the west. They were among the earliest African ethnic groups who converted to Islam. At the same time, many of them also retained elements of older animist beliefs in various forms. So there, of course, those of you who follow my research, you know I talk about the Fulani in South Carolina and how that culture left from there to Texas. And you're going to see that his research confirms the same thing. Let me just get to that part. Among the Fulani and other herding cultures in West Africa, bonds of high complexity have long existed between people and animals. Some of those relationships are unlike others that have developed in modernizing economies of the Western world. I'm going to say that part again. Some of those relationships are unlike others that have developed in modernizing economies of the Western world, not just America, Europe. You're talking about, the French, Spain, not Great Britain, Britain, London. In stock raising industries through much of the United States and Western Europe, livestock are widely perceived in profoundly material terms. Throughout sub-Saharan West Africa, attitudes have long been very different. A major factor may have been animist religions, which were strong in Africa during the 16th, 17th, and 18th century. They still exist today. In deeply rooted animist cultures, many material objects in the world are thought to be occupied by abiding spirits that dwell in rocks, soil, water, light, mountains, rivers, plants, and animals. The way of thinking encouraged a sense of spiritual connection between people and animals. Leading examples were Fulani cattle herders and their animals in West Africa, from Senegal and Gambia, northern Nigeria and Ghana, through much of Sahel. Fulani have long been among the most successful cattle herders in the world, on the planet. They and their animals tend to live close together and know each other intimately. Their longhorn West African cattle were big and dangerous to people. I wish I could show you a picture of a little boy with a big cow. And how that little Fulani boy is able to control a herd of big cows. Yes. The Fulani managed these large, aggressive animals without the aid of barbed wires, corals, squeeze chutes, tranquilizers, horses, or dogs. Yet one Fulani herder can keep 50 hungry animals out of succulent, unfenced cropland. And on a forced march of up to 20 miles a day, one herder, big aggressive animals, have them marching up 20 miles a day. How? With long sticks and a remarkable understanding of how cattle think and feel. By and large, Fulani do not drive their animals, they lead them by methods that some Westerners find inconceivable. Now notice he said at the beginning, these are ancient, the Fulani are ancient people. So these Westerners, they're new people. They can't even conceive how the Fulani, the Fulbhe, are able to control these big, huge beasts. Until they observe them in action, Fulani cattle, meaning they can't, it's inconceivable to them until they see it with their own eyes. Fulani cattle herders began by gaining control of the most powerful bull and the dominant cows in the herd. Small Fulani boys at an early age are taught to approach a big bull without fear and hit him hard with a stick. When the bull begins to show anger, boys are trained to hit the animal again and again with unwavering resolve. By that method, even a small Fulani child learns to control a large animal. Mastery. This is ancient wisdom from an ancient people. And again, we have this in us. We have this inherited wisdom. We just have to tap into it. You're not going to get it from their schools. I just want you to know that. I'm not saying don't go to their schools. I'm not saying don't get an education. I'm just saying this ancient wisdom that our people already have, you can't get it from them. All you have to do is tap into yourself. It's there. In that process, a Fulani herder replaces the dominant animal and becomes the leader of the herd. So strong is his acquired authority that he has only to make a particular call and start walking. And again, Westerners are amazed. Like, how do they do this? Ancient wisdom. The animals fall into line behind them and keep moving many miles through a very long day. In that repeated process, herders themselves become the dominant animal. And this type of control that Fulbhe have over the animals, the way they touch them, the way they pet them, you know, the way they pacify them, and the way they discipline them. He goes on in this book to say how neuroscientists of the West actually study the Fulani. And this is interesting because neuroscience is one of the topics that I love. And just to see these two topics that I love come together, the Fulani and neuroscience, with me, it's like it's hardly anything I talk about without putting a Fulani on it anyway. So here it is, neuroscience. I've read several books on neuroscience. And now to see how the neuroscientists are so amazed by this ancient wisdom of the Fulani that they study the Fulani and map out a neuroscience logic to what the Fulbhe do. It's amazing. Let us continue. So there's a lot inside this book. I try to keep my presentation short. How much time did I use so far? I can't see. Okay, so let me start to bring this to a close. I just want to make a few more points that confirms much of my research. So, so here, talking about the Western frontiers, continuing about the Western frontier. In 1739, several of these Fulani slave herders wounded their master's son, killed another man, ran away with his horses, and rode south to Spanish Florida. So again, just going back to Bilali, he had 500 under him. Here's just a few Fulani who they tried to enslave. They wounded the master's son, killed another man, probably the so-called master, and ran away with his horses. So if a few Fulani would do something like that, what would 500 do with guns? Like, how could this, so again, it's a ridiculous narrative to say that the Bilalis were slaves. They absolutely was not. So they killed him, ran away with his horses. A party of Carolina Rangers was sent after them. What were they going to do? But these African cattle hunters eluded their pursuers. American Indians were put on their trail and succeeded in killing one African, but the others reached St. Augustine. Spanish leaders welcomed them, and they were received there with great honors. One of them had a commission given to him and a coat faced with velvet, much to the fury of their former English masters. So this is the wisdom of the Fulani. They know, okay, well, these Spanish are against these British. All right, well, I'm going to go over to the Spanish side and get away from these British tyrants that's trying to enslave me. And they went over to the Spanish side, and they was welcome. But what's interesting about this also, if those of you who follow my research, we spoke about Fulani origins in Native American culture. There's a 2-part interview that I have on my page. And what came out of that discussion was that the Seminoles, the black Seminoles, I strongly believe were Fulani, because they came out of Carolina, just as it's stated in this research. And again, a lot of Fulani changed their identity to Native Americans to avoid slavery. So these black Seminoles, if you study the Seminole people, up until this day, the Seminoles have Fulani cattle, and they use Fulani rearing techniques. This is not an accident. So they're mixed with other people right now, yes, but you could clearly see that the Seminoles were originally Fulbhe people. They weren't Indians. They were Fulbhe people. They were Fulani people. And the proof of it is the cattle. You can't get those cattle, nor the cattle rearing techniques from any place but Futajalin. And these Fulbhe went down to Spanish Florida. Yes. And finally, this last point, and then I'm going to close. So South Carolina, going back to South Carolina. So as you can see, he says a lot about South Carolina. And again, those of you who follow my research, you know a lot of it was rooted in South Carolina, where my paternal family is from. South Carolina's stockmen made much use of African slaves, and some were attentive to the importance of their ethnic origins in Africa itself. English slave traders and Carolina masters held Fulani from Gambia in high regard, in large part for their long experience as cattle herders. So as you can see, I'm going to say a quote from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And when he said it's so simple, but it was so profound to me. He says, the white man knows you well, but you don't know him well. That's a simple statement, right? The white man knows you well, but you don't know him well. So as you could clearly see, they know us well. Yes, they do. They know our ancient African traditions, our ancient science. They know us well. We don't know them well. Very profound statement by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. So again, I thank Allah for this type of research coming out, and just keeping the conversation going. That Allah inspired me to begin and to do a lot of research on 10 years ago now, and and may Allah continue to bless bless our people to become enlightened by this knowledge, because the area where we must become free is our minds, our heart, our spirit, and our soul. This is what has to be liberated above all. So if we're still under the spell of white supremacy, the spell of black inferiority, the spell of we must depend on another people in order to survive. If we're still under that spell, then we're like, the animals that the Fulani control. They know how to control them through their spirit. So we are being controlled spiritually. And this is why we not only have to return to our native land, we have to return to our native mind. And we definitely have to return to the religion of our people. Oh, yes. We have to get out of the religion of our slave masters, because that's a deep spiritual control. And a lot of us who find out, well, I was Muslim when I was born, but when a lot of us find out we come from Fulani people, I notice a lot of you return back to Islam. That is very smart, because that's the religion of your ancestors. That's the religion that gave your ancestors power. Another thing that was brought out in this book, just one last point I have to make. Where is this? Because there's certain language that I use in describing Fulani history. Yes, it's here. Fulani history, Western historians did not use this language. Usually when they talk about Futajalan, they'll say a kingdom. They love to call African states kingdoms. Because a kingdom is like, a family, African family ruling over, an African tribe or whatever. And so this family, but I use the term nation state, because when I did the research, the great empires of Takror and Mali mirrored nation states before Europe had nation states. So what I found interesting in this book is that he also uses the term nation states in referring to the kingdom of the Almoravids. Did I miss this? Just give me a second. I really want to read from this before I close out. I think I lost the page. Give me a second. Well, okay, but it's in here, and to me that type of language is of extreme importance. One, we had in Fujijalin a constitutional government in West Africa before America was even formed. That's the intelligence of the Fulbhe and Fulani people. They already had a constitutional government. Secondly, he refers to them as nation states, because when you have a constitution, you're a nation. You're not a kingdom. You are a nation. And we had ancient nation states during the time of the Almoravids, which he also brings out in this book, that we had that the Almoravids who founded Morocco, that movement started in Senegal. And as I brought out in my research, that the Fulbhe and the Tuaregs were the founders of Morocco, which is one of our homelands. So thank you for your time. I just wanted to share this new information coming out. May Allah bless you all. I pray Allah it was beneficial to you, and inshallah we'll keep this conversation up. Coming soon, I would like to discuss some of my recent findings during my travels to the Middle East in regards to the Fulbhe people. Yes, the Fulbhe people. So that should be my next talk, inshallah, coming up soon. Thank you again. May Allah bless you all. Assalamu alaikum.